On TV, on radio, and on your smartphone. This is talkTV.
Hey, very good evening and welcome to Jeremy Kyle Live for Thursday night. Now, regular viewers know that I normally start this show in a jovial or jokey way, but tonight really isn't the time for that. As you might know by now, earlier today a man armed with a knife attacked small children in a playground in southern France. This disgusting excuse for a human being attacked innocent nursery kids, including a British girl who is reportedly 2 to 3 years of age. Here is what Foreign Secretary James Cleverly had to say earlier.
Our thoughts are with the victims and the families, and we stand ready to support the French authorities in whichever way we can. Also aware that one of the children injured was a British national. We have already deployed British consular officials who are travelling to the area to make themselves available to support the family.
Also speaking earlier, the French Prime Minister confirmed that the suspect, a Syrian gentleman, has refugee status in Sweden. Now, maybe some of you will think this is controversial and some people won't like what I'm about to say. But for me, what today proves, without any shadow of a doubt, is that the migration problem that is so often top of the agenda on this show clearly isn't just a British problem. And it isn't just a small boats crossing the Channel problem either. I think most people now believe that the age where anyone can roam across different countries without checks or balances surely has to come to an end. We'll be discussing that in more detail in a moment. But first, joining me live to give us more information is Bénédicte Paviot, France 24 correspondent. Bénédicte, thank you so much indeed for joining us. Can you tell us exactly in detail what happened today?
Yes, the first thing to say is that France is in shock tonight, not just the people, understandably, of Annecy in the southeast of France. In this picturesque park by the lake, a man understood to be a 31-year-old Syrian Christian actually barged in to this playground and clearly seemed to target very small children. He stabbed 4 children who are tonight in a critical condition. Well, 2 of them are in a critical condition. One of them is British. I understand that that child is 3 years old. The other one in a critical condition is Dutch. I believe that one is 22 months old. 2 of those children are cousins. He attacked them with a knife that has been found and retrieved by French police that acted quite swiftly, only shot him in the legs, and an adult was also, he then attacked an elderly man who is in a critical condition as well. We don't know his nationality. When you listen to or watch the video, there are blood-curdling screams of the parents, the minders who were there. It's an area that attracts a lot of people from the town Annecy itself, and also tourists. All kinds of information is coming out tonight on French television. One of the TV channels, BFM TV, has managed to speak to a woman who says that she's his ex-wife. She's 26 years old. She's Swedish. She says that this man went to Sweden 10 years ago, that she married him 3 years ago, and she had and has a child with him that is 3 years old, a little girl. She said that he was originally from Asake in northeast Syria, a town that it seems was attacked and invaded by Daesh, so-called ISIS, and that persecuted Christians. I leave that to one side. Now, news that is shocking people above and beyond the tragedy, which it is, and the fact that, of course, President Macron, as the French Prime Minister, have condemned this, what he called an absolutely cowardly attack, is the fact that not only did he obtain Swedish refugee status or refugee status in Sweden, he applied 3 times unsuccessfully, it would appear, for Swedish nationality. It was refused 3 times. He then went on to apply for refugee status in Switzerland, where I think, but that needs to be checked, that it was granted. He then also applied for refugee status in Italy, it would appear that it was granted.
Benedict,
the country
can
that
I-
refused him refugee status, Jeremy, to be clear, tonight, is France. And he had just received, on the 4th of June, notice that his refugee status had been refused. He has been in France, Jeremy, I understand, since last October.
Listen, I was jumping in because of time, Benedict. Just one final question, and this will be dissected by news channels the length and breadth of this world. One could point to the fact that he hasn't seen his child for 4 months. We can point to the fact about the immigration issues. Migration is a topic in the United Kingdom that creates such discussion, such diversion. This will only, in France and across Europe, inflame tensions. But I think people have to be aware that we need to get facts. But when you think that somebody can do something so horrific and there are questions to be answered in terms of migration, the whole thing gets worse and worse. Benedict, thank you very, very much indeed. I guess for us, the question should be, how worried are we about the asylum aspect of what can only be described as a horrific attack? Here to talk about this in more detail is the chair of the Migration Watch, Alp Mehmet. Alp, thank you very much indeed. People's opinions in this country about open borders, I could try and take this show out every night away from immigration, migration, the boats, everything. It doesn't make any difference because it is still the #1 thing that people want to talk about, they want to know. Today will inflame tensions, yes or no?
It will do more than that. I think it will worry people sick. And the reason for that is that, frankly, had this individual managed to get himself into a boat, a dinghy, and come across the channel, there's every likelihood that we would have kept him here, we would have allowed him to stay here. And that, to me, is absolutely insane. The fact that someone, frankly, if he had thrown his documents away, if he had destroyed any documents that he had that established who he was, we would have taken him in and let him free to roam about for so long as it took to establish whether or not we would give him permission to stay. And even if we denied him that sort of refuge, we would still not get rid of him. That is why our asylum system, our whole system of control is in a total mess, and why the government needs to get a grip.
Interestingly, and this just came to me whilst you were talking so eloquently about it, the frustrations in the United Kingdom are obvious to anybody and everybody. And we sit here every night and we talk about, you know, we've got to show that we're caring. We've got to close our borders and make sure we look after our own. And everybody says to me, you know, the Home Office isn't fit for purpose. Our processing system is a joke. It takes too long, blah, blah, blah. The French have always, to me, no disrespect to them, seemed to, you know, Britain's always the soft option, the last port of call, isn't it? Do you think that what happened today will strengthen the French government's, society even's response to a problem that is not just based in the United Kingdom, but as I said in the intro, people are free to roam all over the world, it seems now, with little or no checks. That is not a good look. Do you think France might harden its response?
They will initially react and shout and bluster, but ultimately it will continue as it has done for years, frankly. Part of the reason for that, of course, is the EU. Now, you mentioned that this guy was from Sweden, where he'd been given refuge. He had also obtained permission to stay in Switzerland, being given refugee status there, which is part of the Schengen arrangement, whereby if you enter one bit of Schengen, you can roam about pretty much freely, although even there, and even those members of the Schengen arrangement are beginning to think twice about it now and have some checks. But what we need is to restore border checks at every point, not just coming into this country, but frankly, into France, into Germany, into Greece, wherever else they're entering Europe, they should be checked thoroughly before they're given permission to stay. And if we can't do that, frankly, we may as well give up and say anyone is welcome We don't care who you are and what you're going to do. You're welcome to come here.
Could not agree more. Now,
I
want to make this point. This is a horrific story that we will follow. We will continue to talk about throughout the next few hours, days and weeks. It's a horrific story. Young children attacked by a man, but naturally, because of the fact that he has refugee status, many people asking lots of questions. Alp, to just move on to something completely unrelated, I understand that you have a new report out today saying that the UK population on the basis of migration could grow to over 80 million. How have you worked that out?
Well, quite easily, actually, when you've got experts on hand, as I have, Professor David Emeritus, Professor of Demography at Oxford University, who's been with Migration Watch for 20 years. In fact, he was one of the co-founders of Migration Watch. He has looked carefully and he has really given what is likely to be the lesser of the sort of numbers that we could get. If you look at the numbers coming in, 600,000, if it were to continue at that sort of rate, over 25 years, by 2046, our population would grow at the lower estimate by something like nearly 16 million people. That is, I could go into all sorts of detail, but I'm not sure that your viewers actually would want us to go into the
Let me jump in and say what you're saying is the equivalent of 15 cities the size of Birmingham. It would ensure that we would need 6.5 million more homes. It's an extraordinary statistic. Met, for now...
It is.
For now, I really appreciate your time. I wanted to bring that in. I know it's unrelated, but I think it's also a very, very important thing, and it's a discussion that will continue. Joining me now to discuss this, and of course that lead story today, journalist and campaigner Mike Buckley, head of news at the News Movement, Rebecca Hudson, and Conservative commentator Benedict Spence. Can I start with you, Rebecca, if I can? When you see that horrifying image... And, of course, he was a refugee. And, of course, we were sitting talking off air earlier about the reasons. This will only harden public opinion against open borders, because people will say, there's a man who's obviously got issues, who is quite literally roaming across Europe because of this policy. He could have been here. Alp said it. Dreadful.
I mean, I think you're right. I think there is a real danger that people begin conflating the very real need that vulnerable refugees from around the world have with this idea that then we have these open borders where maniacs like this awful man are free to roam. But I think it's really dangerous to conflate the two. And I think kind of the coarsening of rhetoric around refugees is not somewhere that we want to be. I think this man could have been a French citizen. He could have been British. I don't think the fact that he was a refugee from Syria is the key story here. I think what he's done, going and attacking those children and those elderly people in a park, is the story. And his refugee status, I think, is something that we should be treating separately. And I think Schengen, for the fact that obviously it's enabled him to travel between these countries, but it also enables the free movement of 400 million people and goods every year. So I don't think that this horrendous example, the worst example of freedom of movement, should be used to then diminish the argument for all of it.
Benedict, if I can bring you in, I mean, Rebecca is spot on. The people who have an issue with open borders, the millions of people in this country have an issue with our country being flooded with migrants, illegal and legal, are going to jump upon this, quite rightly, I would assume, and presume. But Rebecca's right. This maniac, and let's just name him as a maniac. I mean, I heard, and I'll probably be told off for saying this, I was listening to that report. This is a man who hasn't seen his 3-year-old child for 4 months. I might respectfully suggest, I don't know, did something domestically happen where he can't see his kid and he's gone into a playground and lost his mind? I'm not saying... But that's speculation. Unfortunately / fortunately, it's going to focus people's minds again.
It is, although I do think, whilst we have had a hardening of resolve, I think, in this country against open borders, against illegal migration across the Channel and against the increased numbers of legal migration, I do think it's an interesting thing that we haven't really had the same response that we have in Europe. Now, you think about the political situation in France. The second largest, most successful party is the former Front National. In Germany, the Alternative for Germany is a very popular party. In Sweden, which let in hundreds of thousands of people, including this man at one point, the Swedish Democrats. Democrats are one of the leading parties, and in Italy right now, the government is led by the party that used to be the fascist party, the Fratelli d'Italia. They have had a very sort of aggressive swing, almost across Europe, Hungary, Poland, towards quite aggressive right-wing governments and parties. We haven't really had that here. All that we've had, really, is a hardening of public resolve on certain issues. This issue in particular. What there hasn't really been is that sort of throwing your arms up and going, well, that's it. We're all off to the far right. And I think it's very interesting how we talk a lot in this country about how we must be very careful about the rhetoric that we use. We're not that country, though. Even now, whilst you've got things like this going on, even whilst we had men with bombs going into the Manchester Arena and blowing up children, when we had people committing attacks in London, there was not that massive surge towards the far right that we have in other countries.
I mean, I think, Mike, bringing you in, that's a really interesting point that Benedict makes, is the danger that a political movement or a feeling is going to move in that direction, exactly as Benedict said in Italy, in France and in Germany, on the back of this sort of horrific incident.
I mean, I'm going to agree with Rebecca, and I think conflating this man's refugee status with the horrific thing that he has done today is frankly ludicrous. There are millions of refugees across the EU. They're all moving around the Schengen zone, you know, because they're allowed to. Have any of the others done this? No, they haven't. I was reading about French crime earlier today. 948 murders in France last year. Admittedly, today was worse because it was very young children. Sexual assaults are rising, basic assaults are rising, burglaries are rising. They've got a crime problem in France. Are we going to ban French people from coming here because they might murder somebody? No, we're not. What about the States?
A Jewish woman was murdered. She was beheaded in her own apartment a few years ago in Paris. Catholic priest was beheaded in his own church in northern France.
What about the bomb in the Bataclan?
There was a series of arson attacks across France that are all suspected
what
of being
about the States? So many mass shootings.
It is something that, well, mass shootings are
mass
slightly
shootings
different.
in the States, all by white people, might I add. Do we ban white Americans from coming here? No, we don't.
Do we have the liberal gun laws that they have in the US and Europe? No, we don't. They don't have the same access to firearms.
They could use a knife if they want to come here and murder people.
And they do, and we do
don't
have
ban them
knife
flying
attacks.
here, and they're thousands.
And we do have knife attacks in Europe. In the UK, we've had knife attacks. We've had them a
my
few metres
point
away
is,
from this very studio.
My point is, you can't extrapolate from one man who's clearly got horrendous mental issues to every Syrian refugee or every
Nobody, I think,
refugee.
is doing that.
Just
but
the
I don't
same
think it's
as,
not unfair
well,
to raise.
actually, the gentleman earlier on, well, absolutely doing that. Say we need to, you know, shut borders across Europe. It's none of his business. He's not in the European Union. I'd also like to comment on the report he made. Saying we're going to have a population.
Well, let me just
million.
read this. The UK's population could increase to over 80 million by 2046, according to ALP's report. Is this sustainable? Because I will put this to you, on the back of what we saw today, and it's horrific, that will harden and inflame tensions and people's ideals, and people will go, hold on a second, 80 million, that's unsustainable. What about us? That's what I think is going to happen.
Let me reassure your viewers that is not going to happen. I read his report earlier on. It's one of the most farcical pieces of information I've read in my whole life. We had a very, very high level of migration last year, in part because of Ukraine, in part because of people coming in from Hong Kong. So it was an unusually high number. We had 600,000 last year. The year before it was 200,000. I was looking back over the last however many years it is. It's never been higher than 200,000, apart from last year. To take last year's exceptional figure, extrapolate across the next 25 years and say there'll be 80 million people here. There won't be. But it's the same as saying if Liz Truss was Prime Minister not just for 1 month and trashed the economy, but for every month, the economy would be bankrupt and we'd all be
I get that, and you've got 10 seconds, Benedict. I'm asking the question, though, Mikey, on the back of what you've seen in France, on the back of figures and reports like that, are opinions going to harden and the British public's resolve about keeping open borders is going to disintegrate? That's what I'm asking.
I think if we're not strong on borders and if we're not strong on policing and if we're not strong on things like house building and infrastructure, yes, they will. And we can say I agree that the report, if it's going to be 600,000, is too much, but they are still over 200,000. That's still a large amount. Loads
to discuss, and more on that horrific story coming up. And next on JK Live, Rishi Sunak has been in America meeting President Biden, and again, there was a gigantic gaffe. We're coming back in 3. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Jeremy Kyle Live for Thursday night. And don't forget, my friends, thanks for tuning in. And you can get in touch with me throughout the show and on the socials, on Insta, Twitter at talkTV, using that hashtag JKLive. Now, in a minute, we'll talk about the controversy over Boris Johnson's honours list and the accusation that Dreary Starmer is purging the Labour Party of socialists. I've got one right here. But first, earlier today, Rishi Sunak made his first White House visit as PM. And hilariously, but actually I'm beyond saying hilariously, Biden couldn't even remember who Sunak was. Have a listen, my friends.
Well, Mr. President, I just promoted you, Mr. Prime Minister.
There is a lot I can say, and what I will say is this, very quickly, right? I used to laugh. I used to say that's the leader of the free world. I would say only this. The man has done great things, has served his country. I think it's time one of his family members came forward and said, listen, pal, you're too old, you've done amazing things. If we imagine this man in 6 years, if he gets re-elected, it's ludicrous. This is the fifth face-to-face powwow, by the way, between President and PM, and the talks are expected to cover really interesting issues like Ukraine and green industries. One man who can shed light on all things across the pond, great friend of mine, US journalist and commentator Mike Graham, no, the American one. Mikey, help us. What does this all mean, apart from the fact that you could have a president for 6 years who doesn't know anything? UK-US relations, how's it going? What's the latest, my friend?
Well, on behalf of President Biden, I just want to say that it was great to have President Snack Pack here from the United Bangladesh Kingdom, and that we think that it's very important that we have close relationships with you. So that's a message straight from the White House. We want to get that in there.
Does it embarrass, Mikey, on a serious note? And I want to get into it because I said it just then, you heard me. I'm beginning to think somebody should be big enough to come forward from his family, his wife or his sons and say, Dad, darling, it's not right. I mean, what message does it send to the world, seriously?
Well, that's one of the conversations that people in the U.S. are having, particularly with developments in the Ukraine, where you had, of course, the whatever happened at the dam, which no one's sure yet what that was, and the possibility of a counteroffensive. You've got Republicans running for president who do not want to continue the Ukraine level of support the way it has been. Others, like, for example, former Vice President Mike Pence, who just entered the race, who's very strongly in favor of of the U.S. backing Ukraine. And so it's important to have leadership. And there are not a lot of people in the U.S. who view President Biden as a leader. Interestingly, not only do 2/3 of independent voters think that President Biden is no longer fit for the office or is too old, but almost half, 40-some% of Democrats say that they don't think he's up to the job, and yet he's there. As far as the UK-US relationship, one of the things that's hampering all of our political developments on foreign policy is if Donald Trump doesn't talk about something, nobody talks about it. This isn't a slur against Trump, although there are plenty of those. It's that the media in the U.S. is so focused on Trump that it's hard for any other topic to get any oxygen. And there are a lot of us, for example, when Brexit happened, a lot of people on the right in the U.S. were thinking, hey, this could be a new model for kind of an Anglosphere of economics, of global, force and the ability to use our military force to do good things. There are a lot of models here that could be an example to the rest of the world. We could have an Anglosphere response to the growing threat of China. None of that conversation is happening because if you can't get it on, Donald Trump's notes, unfortunately, the American media, particularly the political media, just aren't interested in talking about it.
I mean, today, how was Mr. President Sunak received in Washington, D.C.? I mean, we heard they were going to talk about a collaboration on security. They were going to talk about, green issues. Did anything meaningful take place, or was it just a photo opportunity with the man who also, by the way, apart from calling Sunak Mr. President, had cards, bless him. He had cards, of which my director just said in my ear, that's what old people have. All right, I get it. But do you know what I mean?
Oh, sure. And you'd like to think that there'd be some serious conversations about Ukraine and Europe's and the West's support for Ukraine. Did that come out? You'd like to see some talk about the economy and this battle with inflation, and it's hitting Europe in a different way than it's hitting the U.S. Is there going to be some kind of coordination to try to help lift all of our economies so that we can be stronger once again with the rising threat of China? And if that conversation occurred, we haven't heard about it yet. And so that's one of the aspects of having a president that everybody knows is not going to be nimble, not going to do a lot of thinking on his feet. It's just where we are.
Is he, very quickly, anti-British?
No. That I know the Irish thing and blah blah blah. First of all, Americans are so self-absorbed. We don't have time to be really anti. We vaguely are aware we're anti-China but pro TikTok. I mean, that's as close to a.
I've got this for you. There's no country closer to us than Great Britain, Biden's just said. He got our name right. I'm confident the US and the UK will continue to lead the world to greater peace and prosperity. Final question to a man whose opinion I love. Somebody said to me the other day on a train, an American, I think you know this, the best we can do is Joe Biden against Donald Trump. Trump's going to beat him, isn't he?
The polls, I'll put it this way, it is at best a coin toss either way. And that's just a fascinating statement about Donald Trump, who is one of the most unpopular people in American politics. He won in 2016 because they found one person who was just as unpopular, Hillary Clinton, for him to run against. The argument from Democrats is, you may not be impressed by Biden, but he's a nice enough guy and we'll be able to hold our coalition together and stop him. A lot of smart people I know in DC politics who don't like Trump, including Bob Shrum, who ran 7 Democratic presidential races, said to me straight up, Michael, I don't want the Democrats to get to work to help Trump get the Republican nomination because he can win. So I'll take Bob Shrum's word for that.
MG, always a pleasure, never a chore. Listen, my friends, we have some breaking news. Rishi Sunak has just responded and said what he feels about those horrific stabbings earlier. Have a listen.
All our thoughts are with those affected by this unfathomable attack, including a British child, and with their families. I've been in touch with President Macron. We stand ready to offer any assistance that we can.
That's the latest on that horrific story earlier in France. Rishi Sunak responding in Washington. My panellists still with me. Mike, what do you make of this trip, Rishi's trip? I mean, this special relationship, it just, I don't know. Was there any substance to this whole point?
I mean, the whole special relationship comes from, I mean, literally decades ago when a US president said it kind of off the cuff, and we still talk about it now. And I think, to be honest, we've got a bit of a chip on our shoulder as a nation. And in the real world, of course, the US has far more important relationships than the UK, sadly. We used to be a bridge between the US and the EU. We decided to remove ourselves from that role. So actually, the US is now more interested in talking to Brussels or Berlin or Paris than they are in talking to the UK. However, they'll go through the theatrics of talking about the special relationship, which Biden knows, just as Sunak knows, is for news bulletins in the UK, because Sunak's trying to shore his poll rating up. What I want to say on Biden, though, even though he does occasionally make the odd gaffe, he's actually did a pretty great job as President of the United States. They create hundreds of thousands of jobs every month, and I watch the stats come in every month, and I think, goodness me, how are they managing to do that? Their economy is 5% bigger than it was in 2019, just before the pandemic. Ours hasn't grown at all, as we know, because we've got a terrible government that can't, sort out the economy. We've got inflation off the charts. Theirs is fine. He's brought out the Inflation Reduction Act. The biggest things happen in climate change world in history. It's genuinely a good thing. It's upending the global economy. The EU struggling to work out how it's going to respond. So is China. So are we. Biden's doing a pretty great job. He's achieved a lot.
Benedict Spence, Biden's doing a good job.
I mean, he's not been as bad as he could have been. But I think, actually, when it comes to election time, people are not necessarily going to look at all those things. They're going to remember the video footage of people falling off American aircraft as they flew out of Afghanistan. They're going to remember how the United States was perceived to have failed in a major way on the world stage and how that encouraged its rivals around the world. They're going to look at how the United States has completely lost any influence that it had in the Middle East, in Southeast Asia, in Europe, actually. Its influence has been hollowed out. And actually, when we talk about how Britain isn't really, the power that it once was, actually, when it comes to the Ukraine war, the country that led more than any other, apart from maybe Poland, was the UK. Actually, it played a vital role in dragging the US, kicking and screaming, and dragging Germany, the real country that it has the special relationship with in Europe, kicking and screaming into that conflict. So I think we need to think about this slightly more broadly. He has not, as it were, brought a lot of prestige to the White House, and the fact that he can't remember where he is at any given moment does not help.
OK, listen, moving on, and I want to get Rebecca... I've been waiting all night for this. Rishi Sunak, it's announced, is set to accept former PM Boris Johnson. God, I miss him. Resignation honours list. This is reportedly in an attempt to end the feud between the two. I would say is he's trying to buy Boris Johnson's silence, because I've said it before to you, Rebecca, Rishi Sunak, right, would not be the Prime Minister if Boris Johnson had gone through. We know he had the numbers, and the Tory party faithful would have voted for him. Sunak wanted this job. I think there's a lot of things that are coming home to roost. Do you think this honours list, that's full of people, by the way, that everybody says shouldn't get an award, there are plenty who will? Good luck, Nadine. Do you know what I mean? I mean, what is this? Is this politics at its worst?
I think it absolutely is politics at its worst. I mean, of course, if these honours go through, this was going to cause 2 by-elections if Nadine Dorries is lucky enough, and Alok Sharma, which is a nightmare for Rishi Sunak as we approach the government. So, of course, it's about buying his silence. And I actually can't believe that we're even contemplating letting Boris nominate anyone.
Why?
Because he's a scoundrel. He's completely embarrassed the office. You want to talk about Biden diminishing the office of the President of the United States. I mean, our Prime Minister is being investigated for lying during a pandemic. I can't believe that we want to stuff the House of Lords with cronies and cheerleaders for a man
It's the best place for them. We know where they are.
I'm glad Ed Vaizey's not here tonight. We asked Sunak, Sunak has accepted Bojo's resignation, honours this. Is he trying to buy his silence? 89% of you saying yes. Frank, yes, of course he's trying to buy his silence. A pointless exercise. Boris will never stay silent. Come on, Bojo. Ken, this stuff needs to be got rid of. No one should be given this by any Prime Minister, which is what you're saying. MH, of all the front benches on both sides of Parliament are rotten to the bloody core. We should start again. That'd be interesting. Get Mike Buckley in Parliament. That's what you want. And if you're the Labour office, right, you're listening to this, give him a seat because he's a proper man. SC, Rishi Sunak is the kind of politician who has no firm political convictions and is morally elastic. That's really interesting. Lindsay, no such a thing as honour amongst thieves. Mikey, what do you make of this, the honours list?
I think giving, as Rebecca just said, giving Boris Johnson's honours list the light of day, I think is ludicrous. Let's remember he resigned a year ago in shame because he broke COVID rules, which we were all obeying, might I
So did
add.
Rishi Sunak, if we go down that road.
He did, but slightly less. I mean, to be fair to
Hold on a
Sunak.
second, slightly less. If you want to say that about Johnson, the same should be said about
Johnson broke
Sunak.
them on a long-term basis, serially, party after party. We've just heard this week he had somebody come and stay at Chequers with him and Carrie to plan their wedding, for goodness sake, when the rest of us were all stuck at home watching Netflix, whatever we were doing, trying to save other people.
I'm doing my best, Bojo.
Boris
It's difficult.
Johnson couldn't be bothered. Also, might add, he's put his dad on the list. If there's anything that is, more cronyist than that, he's putting his dad on.
He's done a lot for sewage, hasn't he, Stanley?
What has his dad done for this country? Absolutely nothing.
His dad kept
Apart
Boris Johnson from us for the first 18 years of his life. I think he absolutely deserves it.
Right, you three, thank you for now. Next on JK Live, I want to go differently. A street drug with the name monkey dust is plaguing this country, my friends. After the break, I'll talk to a former undercover drugs operative about his personal experiences. Thank you to the panel. We're coming back in 3.
This is talkTV.
Welcome back to JK Live for Thursday night. The big dog, Piers Morgan, here from 8. But now let's take a deep dive into an issue that's been back in the headlines over the last few weeks, namely the street drug known as monkey dust. Unbelievably, right, when you hear more about it, it's only Class B. But thankfully, that could be about to change as the government comes to terms with its extreme effects. Have a watch.
A dangerous psychoactive street drug has been flooding the market, monkey dust. Costing as little as £2 a hit, this man-made stimulant can cause hallucinations, paranoia and violent behaviour for more than 12 hours, giving users Hulk-like strength and an inability to feel pain. And it's incredibly addictive. Users have reportedly jumped off buildings, lit fires and eaten through glass, with stories of zombie-like addicts terrorising town centres, particularly Stoke-on-Trent. Originally classed as legal high, dealers flew under the radar by selling the pale powder as plant food or bath salts. In 2010, it became a Class B drug, but in May, the government recommended monkey dust be reclassified as a Class A, meaning dealers could face up to life behind bars in the battle to wipe this drug out of the UK.
Thank you to our reporter, Joe. This drug has, rightly, as he said, affected people and families across the country. But what can be done about it? Joining me to discuss this is the Conservative MP for Stoke-on-Trent South, who's campaigned for the drug to be reclassified, Jack Berriton. Jack, good evening. And former undercover drugs operative and chairman of Law Enforcement Action Group, Neil Woods. And Neil and I go back a long, long way. Gentlemen, welcome. Jack, can I start with you, please? Why is this disgusting drug so rife in Stoke-on-Trent?
Well, I mean, there's a number of reasons, and this drug is having an absolutely horrific impact on people's lives on the streets of Stoke-on-Trent, and we've seen the challenges that we've faced. You know, it's cheaper than the price of alcohol on the streets of Stoke-on-Trent for a hit, and this is having massive impacts because, as has been mentioned in your clip, it has a hallucinogenic impact. People are jumping off buildings. We've seen incidents of people causing major antisocial behaviour in our town centres, on our streets. This drug is having an absolutely horrific impact and is ruining lives in our city.
But Jack, that wasn't the question. The question was, why is this happening in Stoke-on-Trent?
Well, I think there's a number of reasons. I think the vulnerability, we've got a large number of vulnerable groups, and often this is particularly, we're seeing homeless people, people who, you know, have got other vulnerabilities, who are, you know, in some of our most deprived communities, who are most exposed to this. And that is one of the biggest challenges that we are facing and seeing, is because people are being exploited very much by this drug, and we are seeing gangs who are taking advantage of often very, very vulnerable people.
The Tories have been in government for 13 years, and I have always tried on this show to look at both sides. I don't know a lot about drugs, but for me, when you describe what it's like on the streets of your constituency, and when I see that video, can you please explain to me why your government, your party, has this classified as a B drug? Why was something not done about this years ago, Jack?
Well, this has been going on for not years, actually. We've seen an increase in 2018-19, then the police got on top of it, and gradually, you know, we saw it unfortunately creep back, and that has been the challenge, that this drug has crept back, and we've seen the increased pressures again. And the reality is, the police are going to continue to try and tackle these issues, but the only way we're going to actually have a long-lasting impact is with that reclassification, because until we get it reclassified, until we increase the consequences for those dealers from what at the moment is a maximum of a 14-year sentence up to a maximum of life, we're not going to increase the cost, we're not going to increase the consequences for those dealers. So that is something that I have been strongly pushing for this reclassification.
Okay, let me bring in Neil. Neil, former undercover drugs operative and friend of mine. Neil, welcome to Jeremy Carr Live. Do you think this should be reclassified, my friend?
Good to see you, Jeremy. No, I don't. Absolutely not. I would rather that we followed the evidence as a response to this. And just to answer one of your earlier questions, why Stoke-on-Trent? Well, this is a drug of poverty. This is a drug of deprivation, as has just been acknowledged by the Stoke-on-Trent MP. that this is affecting vulnerable people. And there are lots of vulnerable people in Stoke-on-Trent. The reason Stoke-on-Trent is because this is incredibly cheap. MDPV and the other similar long-acting cathinones, which are rather unfortunately referred to as monkey dust, they're cheap, and so they tend to thrive. The market tends to thrive in places where there is lots of deprivation.
But why would you not reclassify it to a Class A drug with more sentencing and more punishment if it has such a detrimental effect on people, whether they're in poverty or not? Why wouldn't you, Neil, make it, you know, a worse offence when this drug is so prevalent and causing such misery?
Well, because the evidence is very clear that increasing the level of punitive action has no impact on drug consumption.
So what does? What does?
Well, health interventions. That the police cannot solve problems of traumatised people self-medicating in areas of poverty and deprivation. The police can't solve this. So the impact on Stoke-on-Trent of making this drug a Class A drug will be to increase the violence in the market for this drug. Now, I've worked undercover on Stoke-on-Trent. It happens to be one of the places that I've worked. I now live here. And I can tell you what will happen is that you have an increase in violence. I'm part of the Law Enforcement Action Partnership, which is a worldwide organisation of police and other law enforcement people, and we study this. You know, there's clear evidence. There's even evidence from the Home Office from 2014, which stated that no matter the level of punitive action, even increasing something to the death penalty or life imprisonment does not have any impact on drug consumption. So, organised crime will respond with this threat of further incarceration, with greater threats of violence. So those vulnerable people will be living in even more intimidating circumstances.
Neil, stay there. Jack, final word. I just want to say this, because you were shaking your head. If we legalise drugs or we don't make the punishments greater, where does that lead us as a society? Neil says we'll have greater violence. Then in the end, you just have anarchy. You were shaking your head. Quickly, why, my friend?
I think what we've just heard is utter rubbish, to be frank. We see that this drug is having absolutely devastating impacts on people in Stoke-on-Trent, people whose lives are ripped apart, people whose lives will never come back, because this drug, it doesn't just have the impact of a normal drug. This drug has devastating impacts, lifelong impacts on people's health. And what are we hearing from the police, from other services? They say that this drug has to be reclassified. That is the only way we're going to see.
I'll tell you what I'm going to do, because one of my frustrations. What I'm going to do
off these streets.
Okay, listen. What I'm going to do, because it's one of my frustrations. I always think an hour's a lot of telly, and then everything goes on. We do on Jeremy Kyle Investigates deep dives over an hour. I would like to welcome you. Well, say to you both, come back. Let's do a whole hour on this, legalising drugs, areas that are affected. You both up for that? All right, stay on the line. They'll talk to you about that. And next on Jeremy Kyle Live, it's time for the rhyme. It's probably crap. Solving the north-south divide, speed limits so cars don't collide, and NHS patients aren't satisfied. That and more after the break. We're coming right back. Welcome back to Jeremy Carr Live. Piers Morgan up next with rock legend Kiss's Gene. Oh my God, he's got Gene Simmons. Can I just tell you one thing, by the way? He won't mention the fact that West Ham won the European Conference League last night, but I'm going to. There you go. Right, joining me now for a turbulent Thursday are my panellists from earlier, Rebecca Hudson and talkTV presenter Kev O'Sullivan. You've both got a couple of stories that have got you going for Thursday. Kev, what have you got, my friend?
This was in the Times, but it was in most papers. The Daily Mail, I think, splashed on it. Police say they now attend every home burglary. Officers are attending every home burglary in England and Wales, although more than 2/3 of cases are closed without identifying a suspect. It comes as almost 90% of bike thefts in England in 2022 went unsolved, with many people saying bike theft has basically become decriminalised. I mean, what struck me about this is it's a bit like sort of pub landlords pledging to serve beer, isn't it? But, you know, the police go, we've got this amazing announcement. We're going to investigate burglaries. You're supposed to investigate burglaries. Of course, what we'd also like, I don't know, call me optimistic, call me controversial, maybe they could solve a few as well.
I mean, I'm so with you. It was almost like they're clapping themselves on the back for doing the very bloody thing they're supposed to do, right?
I mean, like you say, like 2/3 going unsolved. So, yeah, very nice to have a visit after you've been through quite a traumatic burglary, but maybe better if you could get some of my stuff back. But also not just decriminalising petty theft, bike theft, burglary, but also really serious things like, you know, sexual assault and rape also has such low conviction rates because of the, you know, poor resourcing, poor policing. So I think we have a huge problem with what we've decriminalised, including burglary.
Yeah, I mean, does this now mean, horror of horrors, they're going to investigate car thefts? If you get hit in the street by somebody, are they going to investigate this? I mean, a couple of days ago, they announced that they would no longer attend mental health issue cases.
Yep.
And they're now saying that they're not going to look for missing persons if they consider it to be a minor case. So whilst saying they're going to investigate burglaries, they're cutting themselves out of a lot of other equations. And, you know, what I think the real problem with the police is, you know, good, they're investigating burglaries, but, you know, let's hope, for God's sake, that this doesn't interfere with their important work going through Twitter, looking for nasty words to solve hate crimes. Let's hope that they can still dance the Macarena. They are still getting their priorities. They get their priorities so wrong that they think it's a great announcement that they're going to investigate crime. It's ridiculous.
Could not agree with you more. Bex, what did you bring me?
So I've got here the warning that an overwhelmed NHS is struggling to provide safe care for cancer patients due to huge staffing shortages. This is a poll of 60 directors of the UK's cancer centres, finding that 95% felt that staff shortages were leading to longer wait times for appointments and delays in cancer treatment. And I think, you know, this is kind of actually similar to what we're talking about with policing. Like, our public services are just creaking through lack of investment. This is what happens after 13 years of cutting back on public spending. You know, you don't have enough police officers to investigate crime. We can't, you know, keep people safe online from cyberbullying and go and investigate burglary. And now we've got an NHS creaking. And I think this then coupled with an increasing fear around migrant workers, it strikes me as quite perverse, because evidently we need to staff the NHS with people, and we have, you know, there is a surplus of people overseas who want to come and work here. And so I think that is not something we should be sneering at.
I have to say, as somebody who had cancer, right, and I mean this, I read this appalling statistic, I think it was about a week ago, that every week of delay of cancer treatment can take 10%, Kevin, off your life expectancy.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm with Becca here. Of course, the police say we haven't got enough money, give us more money. Well, as I say, I would say, how about you stop having 25% of all police officers at a desk? 1 in every 4 coppers never leave the police station. So it's about prioritising correctly. So yes, more money is a help, but basically both the police and the NHS have got to be seriously reorganised from top to bottom. So yes, by all means give the NHS more money, but that tends to go into the NHS money pit. We don't see any improvement in services. We've got hundreds of people on more than £100,000 a year who aren't doctors. Yeah. They're just middle managers. So yes, by all means give them more money, but first, a much bigger priority, reorganise it from top to bottom. This is what's wrong with both the police and the NHS. They're a mess.
very quickly for me, what's the Welsh Parliament called? Because I'll get it wrong.
Senedd.
A member of the Senedd calls for the Welsh Government to scrap detrimental 20-mile-per-hour plan. A petition to scrap plans to introduce a 20-mile-per-hour speed limit in residential areas in Wales has gained more than 21,000 signatures. Ministers intend to reduce the default speed limit in cities and towns to 20 miles per hour from the 17th to cut road accidents, noise and encourage people to walk or cycle. That's great, isn't it? But many are concerned the changes would increase commuting time. So in Wales, under a Labour government, by the way, not only can you afford not to fill your car, you're not allowed to drive your bloody car. That is a very good reason to never allow the Labour Party anywhere near number 10, isn't it?
No, I think this is great. What horrible aims, trying to keep children safe and reduce
don't
pollution.
play that, Charles.
How terrible. And 28 million people in the UK already live in a speed limit of 20
Have you ever
miles per
broken a
hour.
speed limit,
I'm
Rebecca
a terrible
Hudson?
driver.
Well, there you go.
Yeah. So make it safe. I'm on the road, so make it safe. 20 miles per hour everywhere.
By the way, I've managed to accrue 3 speeding tickets in 2 months. And so I've lately taken...
Brilliant, what a fine panel tonight. What an upstanding panel.
I've lately taken to trying to drive at 20 miles an hour, and it's an absolute nightmare. You feel like you could get out the car and walk faster. I don't accept that we need to drive at 20 miles an hour. This is more sort of climate change fascism. Leave us alone. Let us drive sensibly. Let people get to work. This is nonsense. Why do we consider right now that we're the greatest generation of human beings who ever lived, and everything that happened before is wrong, and what we do now is absolutely right? It's absolutely mad.
Fantastic. Thank you both very much indeed, Rebecca and Kev. We'll go straight to the big dog. Piers Morgan, how are you, my friend?
Well, I do think I'm a special one from a special generation, so I couldn't disagree more with Kevin. I think we are an elite generation, and I'm a living, breathing example of that.
Can I tell you very quickly, my friend, I watched the match last night, got in a car, got home at 11:10. I never thought I'd do this. I got locked out of the house by my wife, who thought I wasn't going home. I spent the night in a Premier Inn, and this morning, the walk of shame in the same clothes in Windsor, along the road past the Army Barracks, and they're all going for their morning run, going, Jezza, what are you up to? I only went to a football match, got locked out of my own bloody house, Piers.
And by the way, who in this very slot last night said to you, West Ham are going to nick it, and then I'll tell you what's going to happen next. I said, Declan Rice, your captain, your hero, will then join Arsenal. I'm not saying I'm Nostradamus, but I'm not far off.
We love you. He's on at 8 o'clock, the legend that is Piers Morgan. That's all I've got time for tonight. Keep it, talk. We'll bring you all that breaking news plus Piers. That's all we have time for. See you tomorrow at 7. Ta-ra.